Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Are You Being Present? I've decided that I want to change the format a little bit with this podcast. I know that I've taken a little bit of a break. And I think I needed it. After 43 podcasts, I really needed to take a step back and look at the library of work that I've produced. And also, just kind of regroup. There's really only so many ways to talk about presence. And I think over the past 8-9 months, working with patients as well as my daily mindfulness practice, my presence practice, I think I've come up with a few more topics that I want to address. So the title and topic of this podcast is Observing the Voice in Your Head with Presence. And one of the reasons why I decided to choose this topic, which I consider a very important one, is because I address this so often in clinic that I believe in my heart that every human living on earth needs to hear this information, because we all have a voice in our head. And more often than not, we are completely dominated by it. We go throughout our days and there is this stream of messages and ideas and distractions that oftentimes take us out of the present moment. So when I'm working with patients, one of the first things I try to assess is how loud that voice is and how it's affecting their reality. And, it's also a reflection point for me because I also have to pay attention to the voice in my head. And the way I like to present it is this. Now, we have what is it called an ego, and our ego likes to be in control. The ego is a component of your personality. We don't need to dig too deeply into the understanding of what the ego is. But what I like to do is explain that the ego was really important for us when we were developing as human beings and living maybe on the Serengeti, being chased by lions, and our life was in danger. And so we had this ego that would keep us alert and make sure that we stayed alive. And so now that we've evolved as human beings and we've built a society and safeguards, often we just don't have any existential threats to our safety. And so we live in this suburbia, or even, you live in an urban setting, and we still have these egos that are components of our personality. And the ego is really a self-serving function. It has a very loud voice and it likes to be in control. And so what it does is it shoots up like a flare. It shoots up these thoughts or memories or whatever it is to try to get your attention. And it knows the perfect times to do this. It'll wait till you're hungry. It'll wait till you're tired, till you're frustrated, whatever it is. It knows exactly when to chime in. And it will do it very effectively. And so it shoots up these flares, these thoughts, and we grab onto it because we assume that the voice that is in our heads basically is us. And we grab onto these thoughts and it creates an emotion. And these emotions create more thoughts and we get trapped in a cycle. And it's a very vicious cycle and it's very difficult to break through. The only way to really get a handle on this is to learn how to be the observer of our thoughts, of our mind. Now, there's two positions that you could take. You're either the observer or you're the victim of this ego mind. And until you take a step back, until this subject is really encapsulated properly, you're going to be the victim of your thoughts because you think that those thoughts are you. But if you can hear these thoughts, if you're able to process it, then is it you? Or are you observing or are the victim of this ego? And our egos are not serving us. Our egos are it's serving itself. Because if our egos were serving us, it would send nice messages to us. It would make us feel better about ourselves. But oftentimes our ego makes us feel worse about ourselves. It makes us feel different and separate, and it creates problems for us. Now, let me ask you this. Why are you listening to that voice in your head if it's not making you feel any better about yourself? Because we're just not taught. We're not taught at a young age to just not listen to it. We're not given the tools that we need to be the observer of what's going on in our minds. Now, the title of this podcast series, Are You Being Present?, is one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself that will get you to break the cycle of this ego-dominated reality that you're living right now. It's not, let me be clear here, we're not being critical at all. We're just trying to shine a light on a process that has been detrimental to you, it's been detrimental to me, and it is at the root of so much self-inflicted suffering. There's so much suffering in the world, and yes, some of it is at the hands of other people, but again, more often than not, the suffering that's taking place is at the hands of our ego. Okay, it's making us feel bad for no good reason other than to keep you trapped in a cycle of suffering. Now, I know that this could be some new information to some people. This could be a good reminder to others. It doesn't make a difference. This information is vital. And, one of the things I've been talking about lately as well is that there's no instruction book for life. There just isn't. You have to kind of figure it out along the way. But if there was an instruction book for life, being present, learning presence and mindfulness would be a foundational chapter. And within that chapter, learning how to be the observer of your thoughts would be one of the first chapters. It would be one of the first subjects that we would have to learn, that I would have to teach you, so that you can really stop, all this needless suffering. We all have egos. It's all, it's an essential component of our personalities, but it is not us. So we have to be the observer. We have to allow these thoughts to float by like clouds in the sky. So let me give you some more, like a tangible tool here. So I told you that the question that needs to be asked, which is also the title of this podcast, is, are you being present? Am I being present? In the beginning, you need to ask yourself that every single time a thought pops up, a memory pops up in your head. Does this thought have anything to do with the present moment? Does this memory have anything to do with the present moment? That's how you're going to become the observer of this ego of yours. Because you have to create some separation. And the only way to create separation is to challenge each and every thought, each and every memory, each and every feeling. Because if you don't, you're going to be the victim of your ego mind. And like I said before, we all have it. We're all dealing with it. Now, through a mindfulness practice, through a presence practice, you can really get ahead of this. But in the beginning, it's a little bit challenging because your ego has been in charge of you. Your ego has been the CEO of your life. And we need to shift that. We need to promote you to the CEO of your life. So the only way to do that is to make you the observer. Okay? So this is a new concept. We have to really embody it. We have to declare that we're going to be the observer of our thoughts. We're going to be the observer of our being, of our behaviors. That no longer are we going to mindlessly react, mindlessly act, mindlessly speak, Okay? This is where mindfulness comes in. So being the observer of your actions, of your thoughts, of your behaviors, it's all intertwined. And this is all really important so that you can create the reality, the life that you really dream of. But the only way to do that is to gain a very specific sense of clarity within your being. And the only way to get clarity is to be present. So I'm not sitting here just telling you be present. What I'm telling you is that you should be the observer at all times. Do not allow that voice in your head to control you, because it will, and it knows the perfect times. So you have, and like whether you're driving around, whether you're just, sitting around, whatever it is, like at all times, ask yourself that question. Am I being present? Does this thought have anything to do with the present moment? Why do I feel the way I do? Why am I thinking like this? Why am I speaking like this? So that you can lead a more fulfilling life, a more mindful life. And it doesn't matter how old you are when you gain this perspective. It just matters that you gain this perspective and that you stop being the victim of that voice in your head. Now, the ego, one of the analogies I like to give is that your ego is like a 3 or 4 year old child. Its voice is very, very loud, and it likes to have meltdowns. And anyone who's ever been around a young child, anywhere from 2 to 4, knows that when a child is having a meltdown, you can't yell at it. You can't, control it. You have to let the child kind of, burn through it. And you acknowledge it. You say, okay, I know you're here. I understand. I see you, but, I'm not letting you, you're not in control. Okay? And that's how you have to be with your ego. Because once you start doing this work, it might get louder because it's been so used to being in control of you. So that, you have to be really consistent, persistent, and vigilant with this activity, being the observer, challenging it by saying, does this thought have anything to do with the present moment? Why are we doing this right now? Why are we thinking about this right now? This is not productive. And almost like mothering yourself or fathering yourself and saying, look, this is just not what we want to do right now. This is not serving me. This doesn't feel good. So I'm going to do something different. And this is like a coming of age thing. It's an awakening. And that's what I'm trying to promote here is an awakening. You're awakening to the present moment, and you do that through observation. I don't want to go in too many circles here, but I think that in a very succinct way, I've provided you with a unique perspective so that you don't have to go throughout your day feeling any less than you choose to feel. When you're experiencing anxiety, it's almost always worrying about the future. And, when you're depressed, it's oftentimes thinking about the past. Now, you can get in the middle of that by asking yourself, well, why am I feeling anxious? Why am I thinking these things? Why am I feeling depressed? Why am I sad? And kind of digging into that. Because, look, if you're feeling anxious about something that's happening in the present moment, that's fine. I totally get it, and it's totally justified. But if you're experiencing any anxiety, stress, or depression about anything that has to do with outside of your present moment, you have to address that. You cannot let memories of the past or worries of the future pollute your present moment. And you have to maintain that sense of clarity, and that sense of clarity is maintained through presence, through your presence practice. So again, you have to be the observer at all times of what's going on inside your head. You have to be the observer of your ego. And I think that's a really powerful offering that I'm providing you right now. Because, this is integral. This is important. It is a key component to living a life that does not have to include so much self-inflicted suffering. And that's it. That's the whole point. People ask, well, what's the point of life? The point of life is to live. It's certainly not to come down to earth, to live on earth, to suffer. Some people might choose suffering, but that's certainly not the reason for living. So why don't you take a moment right now, take a nice deep breath in, and just observe what's going on in your head. Maybe do a little seated meditation, maybe go for a walk. Just enter into a very quiet space and just watch what's going on inside your head. You're going to be really surprised. There's probably a lot of things banging around, and the only way to really get a handle on it is to be the observer. Stop being the victim of that ego mind, of that voice in your head. That voice in your head is not serving you, and you need to start detaching from it. Okay? It's one of the other things that I kind of segue into when I'm working with patients is that there's a quieter voice in your head, and that is your higher self. That is your true essence. And that voice only wants the best for you. And that voice will give you good information, and it's a very loving interaction. But if you're going to be, hammered away by that loud ego voice, you can never hear the other voice. And it's, we're not talking about being schizophrenic or there's multiple voices in your head, but, it is a shame that, in society, we just don't like to address this because we think that if people know that we have a voice in our head, they're going to think we're crazy. That's actually a misnomer, and it does us a disservice. Yes, there's a voice in your head, and if it's not telling you good things, then you need to learn how to have a different relationship with it, a different interaction with it. And these are the first few steps. You got to say, look, I want to stop being a victim. And the way to stop being a victim, again, is to be the observer. So try not to forget this. And I know it's easy to get distracted. I know everyone has a busy life and we're all doing things and multitasking. And, for the most part, I understand. I mean, I get it. I also like to multitask at times, but I also make sure that I'm being present when I'm multitasking. But not to get off topic, bring this back. Be the observer, watch, and listen. And, I want to thank everyone who has listened up till now. I've gotten some really good feedback. I do apologize for the lengthy break that I took, but I felt right at the time to just pause the project. Not because I didn't have anything to offer you, because I needed to also do my work. I needed to continue to look at presence through different perspectives. I needed to sit in front of more patients and have these conversations, and to just realize that this topic, this conversation is so important for everyone. There's no one that's excluded, at all from presence. And which is just leading me to want to continue to provide this information in very varied formats. So I want to thank you for listening to me, and I want to encourage you to be the observer and to do your work, to have a very strong mindfulness practice, to make sure that the relationship that you're having with yourself is healthy, and that you're making the decision and you're choosing to be present.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.